Right. Hello, hello. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Thank you so much for being here today. We welcome you to another edition of Our Ancestors' Voices. We are very happy that you are here with us today and very thankful that you have chose to invest some of your time with us today. As always, we start off the presentation by giving honor and acknowledgement of our Indigenous comrades for which the land we are on. We are including the very top of Canada to the very bottom of Chile when we describe indigenous land to our indigenous comrades of the Western Hemisphere. And without them, we would not be here today. We would not be able to enjoy some beautiful weather, as well as positive energy, good vibes, and more of an appreciation for their struggle because they deserve to have their land back. We also are really thankful and honored to acknowledge our African ancestors, for which we would not be here today. For without them, we are not in a position to make any judgment calls because we know not what they sacrificed for us. And all we can do is humbly try to learn and grow and continue to walk in their footsteps, continue to do the work that they need us to do, and continue to make our own sacrifices so that we can hopefully continue to pass the torch as they needed us to, because that is what this is all about. They didn't work as hard as they did, and they didn't sacrifice as much as they could so we could be at this position and start to go backwards and revert backwards. So we welcome you to our Ancestors' Voices. This is a weekly seminar that is hosted by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We are a mass independent organization that is based out of Africa. We are not based out of Miami. We are not based out of Canada. We are not based out of Sacramento. We are based out of Africa. And we understand that believing in one unified socialist Africa allows us to achieve the goals that oppressed African people are facing everywhere. If we can have control of our land, if we can have control of our resources, then we are in a better position to determine not only how we build future relationships with other comrades who are interested in bartering and exchanging resources with us, but it also allows African people everywhere to have a certain control of the kind of respect that they deserve, because Africa is one of the richest continents on the world, not one of, excuse me, the richest continent in the world. And so that means that if people need rubber, if people need gold, if people need cobalt, if they need coltan, if we are under one unified socialist Africa, and if Africans are controlling said resources, the rubber, the coltan, the gold, then people are forced not only to value and respect Africans because they need their resources, but this also means that they're in a position to understand just how much we have control of how those resources are sent, how they are sold, whatever that looks like. This also means that we're in a better position to support the oppression of other comrades. For example, the diamonds that are cleaned in occupied Palestine are stolen from African soil. And if Africans are in control of their land, then that means we don't need to exploit and contribute to the exploitation of Palestinian people anymore, because we don't need them to clean our diamonds, because we don't need our diamonds to be stolen anymore. And so then that means Palestinians can get their land back and they can start to undo all the harm to their land that has been done with the weapons and the mass destruction and the wars. I would imagine even cleaning diamonds has some environmental impacts when it comes to health and potential lung and other respiratory diseases along the ways. So this benefits both of them. And as I just said, if we can get our land back as Africans, then we're no longer going to be consuming as much for the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. That means we can leave their land and give them some of their space back. So this is a win-win for everyone. And when we think about what it means for all oppression to be eradicated, that's what this seminar represents. And this is why we come to you every week, because we're trying to fulfill the acknowledgement of one unified socialist Africa, truly benefiting all people, not just African people. The sooner that we all recognize that, the sooner we're all better off be, because then we can all start to work towards that goal being accomplished and achieved. As I said, our organization is based out of Africa, and we are of the mindset of one unified socialist Africa. We are following under the principles and the teachings of one of our founders, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, who actually wrote a book by the name of The Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. It lays out step by steps how we can go about building this organization. What are the principles? What are the policies? What are the techniques? What are the strategies? What are the organizations? What are the committees? What are the subcommittees that one would need if they wanted to create a all African People's Revolutionary Party or an all African Women's Revolutionary Union? So we understand that without those co-founders and Nkrumah and Kwame Ture, other folks by the name of Amilcar Cabral and other folks like that, we wouldn't be in the position that we're in today. So we thank them so much for contributing greatly to the reason that we're all here today. And the last thing I'll say before I start the presentation is Our Ancestors' Voices is brought to you weekly by a comrade of the name of Ajamu Umi, who is a longtime organizer with the All African People's Revolutionary Party, also a supporter of the All African Women's Revolutionary Union. Ajamu has been organizing with the party going on 41 plus years, almost 42, if not this May, the next May. And I'm sure you'll clarify that, comrade. So thank you for your work and thank you for paving the way for me. My name is Shukura Umi. I am a daughter to Ajamu, and we have been doing this particular seminar every week for a very long time, since the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're not stopping anytime soon. We have no plans to stop. We are humbled to do this work. We are thankful to do this work. And we are grateful that you all are joining us each and every weekend to hear more about why these topics are so important. So we usually have a slide that kind of walks through everything I just said, but I needed to make some adjustments. So please forgive me for not having that today. We will be back to the regular slide deck next week. But in the meantime, we have a great presentation for you lined up. As you know, if you've joined before, we usually break it up based on the topic. So I might start us off and then Baba Jamu will wrap us up, or sometimes Baba Jamu starts us off and I will wrap us up. So today I'm going to start us off and Baba Jamu will take our ending slide and talk to us about what the topic for next week will be. So we'll jump right in and acknowledge International Women's Day by talking more about what this topic is all about and why it is so important for us to have this idea in mind. So it would seem to me that we already have a pretty good understanding. My slides are jumping here, apologies. It would seem to me that we already have a pretty good understanding of why discussing patriarchy is so important now more than ever, but it never hurts to talk about it again. And if not to talk about it again, to reinforce or to introduce some new concepts that folks may not have considered in their original understanding of the definition of said system of oppression. So when we think about patriarchy, it is in fact a system. You might individually perpetuate patriarchy, and you might see an individual who is individually perpetuating patriarchy. But let's not be mistaken. This is a system that unfairly disadvantages non-male identifying people while unfairly advantaging male identifying people. This system is designed where male identifying people are automatically collecting more power and more power associated by definition because of how they identify. There's not necessarily a policy or a rule. There is just more value, more significance, more honor, more respect that is assigned to male identifying people than to non-male identifying people, to the tune that non-male identifying people have less significance because they don't benefit from patriarchy since they don't identify as males. And it's very important for us to think about that, because that could break down very easily when you start to think about class status, when you start to think about health outcomes, when you start to think about economic security and job safety, when you start to think about social constructs in society and how we navigate on a day-to-day basis. Patriarchy very much benefits male identifying people, and that male privilege associated with it contributes greatly to how the world views males and how males view themselves. Very much so. I was having a conversation just yesterday with a family member, and we were talking about how we were leaving a establishment, and there was a male identifying person who was walking across our path. And so I was kind of taking in the scene, because again, like, this is where you have to check your privilege. I don't know if you identify as a male listening to this, or if you identify as a non-male, but I'd be willing to guess if you are a non-male, you probably are already aware of what I'm about to say, where I'm kind of checking the scene, I'm scoping the landscape, I'm sensing for security, I'm sensing for safety, and I'm thinking about my family member. I'm thinking about what I would do if something happened, and how I need to how do I need to perform, how I need to move myself. I can't think of the other word I wanted to say, but how I need to navigate that space. I'm thinking about all of that in a matter of about 5 seconds, because I'm trying to figure out what the reading is. And this person, this male identifying person, is giving off an odd vibe to me. It's a very strange vibe. It doesn't make me feel comfortable. It makes me feel odd. And I'm trying to check in and be like, what's up? You know what I'm saying? So, my family member is talking to me, and then they notice that I'm doing what I'm doing, and then they stop talking. And so then we proceed to walk to the vehicle, and now this person is walking across us, and I turn around and look, because I'm like, you're giving off a creepy vibe. Like, you're giving off a creepy vibe. So yeah, I have a right to be aware of my safety, and I have a right to scan the scene and make sure that you're not going to bring harm. And yeah, maybe that's me judging, maybe, like, whatever. At the end of the day, if you think that's me judging, why don't you bring that same conversation to the thousands of trans people of color who were missing today? And no one is talking to them about why they had more awareness or didn't have more awareness. Why don't you bring that conversation to the thousands of indigenous Native women who are missing? Let's have that conversation. And then after you have that conversation with all those people, then you can come back to me and tell me that I'm tripping. Okay. Because this is the bottom line. You have to be aware, you have to anticipate your opponent's moves. Like, this is what it comes down to. And again, if you have no idea what I'm talking about right now, maybe that's because you hold some privilege, and you just need to think about that. Like, be comfortable thinking about how that makes you uncomfortable. That's where the growth really occurs, if I'm being honest. So family members stopped talking and kind of noticed that I was peeping out the scene, and got quiet and started peeping it out themselves. When we got in the vehicle, she was like, yeah, you were checking out that man, huh? And I was like, yeah, because he was weird. And I was just trying to make sure that you were okay and make sure that I was okay. And she was like, oh, I was checking him out too. And I was ready to do da 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 if he tried da da. And so I'm just saying, like, this is exactly what that means. And it happens every single day, even to the tune that you have non-male people that have to be really careful with the kind of headphones that we buy. And again, if you hold privilege, these are not even things that you think about. Sometimes people don't want to be bothered, and so they put on headphones for different reasons. It could be a headphone, it could be an earbud, it doesn't matter. But sometimes I put on earbuds because I need for one ear to be occupied while the other ear is open, to be able to pick up and detect what's happening, whether I'm out in nature, whether I'm going for an exercise run, like whatever the case may be. I need to be able to be aware of what's happening around me. And if I'm completely with earbuds, excuse me, with headphones on, then that limits me in terms of me having access to get information faster and make a decision. And it also means that, like, depending on if you have earbuds or headphones, sometimes I'll speak for myself, that's because I don't want to be bothered with male identifying people, because I know that they're trying to get some type of information from me. And if you put in earbuds, it's a universal rule where people don't want to be bothered. Now, sometimes people respect that and sometimes people don't, but I'm just telling you how it is for me as a cis woman, how I walk this earth, how I navigate this earth. So I'm telling you my experiences. And I'm not on the social media chats right now, but I am almost positive that non-male people are lighting up the chat right now because these are the things that we have to think about on a day-to-day basis, minute by minute, second by second. And so my aunt said to me, yeah, I told my partner that this is what I have to do all the time. And he was like, oh, it's not that serious. You don't have to do all of that. And then she said, but that's because he's a man. He doesn't have to think about those things. And I said, this would be true. This would be true. And again, like that's where the privilege is held, right? That's where the privilege is held. So it's really important to just think deeply about this and to think about even the patriarch and how, as I said, it can impact your economic values. It can impact your class system. It can impact your health outcomes. And all the research that I do with health related outcomes, it is clear that African people are under attack with their health. That is very clear. That is not up for discussion. Indigenous Western people of the hemisphere, indigenous people of the Western hemisphere are under attack. That's not up for discussion. Queer identifying people are under attack. Those are some of the groups that have some of the largest poor health outcomes. That is a fact. But when you stratify for gender, or if you stratify for non-binary, it gets more and more pronounced where male identifying queer people, male identifying African people, male identifying indigenous people still tend to have better health outcomes than non male people. Generally speaking, if we're talking specifically about prostate cancer, well, of course, that would be the anomaly, right? But if we're speaking generally, about heart health, if we're speaking generally about cancer rates, if we're speaking generally, okay, these are some of the things. And I argue patriarchy makes people sick. So, this is the question that we need to raise. This is the question. Toxic masculinity makes people sick. People suffering from sexism, they are more likely to be sick. And I'm not just talking about in environments and in public, I'm talking about even when you go to the hospital setting, the patriarch is there, the sexism is there. This is why you get gaslit when you tell the doctor what's wrong with you. Because studies have shown that if you are male identifying, A, you're less likely to be cut off by the doctor, and B, if you are male identifying, you're more likely to be taken seriously. Isn't that something? It's my body. I've had this body for going on 4 decades. Yes, you went to medical school, but that doesn't mean you know my body. All you've done is read some studies that don't even include people like me. And you read about European descent people, and then you generalize and assume that all non male people have some of the same qualities as European descent women. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. It's also very dangerous and racist. Okay. It's a lot of things, but that would be what it comes down to. So this is where the patriarch question really starts to get into play. And we really got to dig deeper into that. Let's not talk about the fact that the gender wage gap is still very much an issue. Let's not talk about the fact that a person who is male identifying who holds a master's is still going to make more money than me holding a PhD. Let's not talk about that. And you want to ask, like, what does money have to do with class status? What does money have to do with health? What does money have to do with navigating this world? It has everything to do because this is capitalism. And the bottom line is if you don't make enough money, life is going to be harder for you, where you're going to have to hustle more, you're going to have to struggle more, you're going to have to pull up more shifts, get multiple jobs. That's a wear and tear on your body. That is a physical wear and tear on your body, which still goes back to health. And I will talk about that in just a moment. All right, so manifestations of patriarchy. Okay, so I want to introduce three subcomponents because we've talked a lot about patriarchy, but part of what I appreciate most about being a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party is we get introduced to larger concepts that are actually very, very very abstract and very minute, and then we find ways to simplify it and make it very simplistic to understand and then be able to articulate it and apply it in other spaces and other settings. So because the party, excuse me, has taught me that skill, I've been able to take that skill and apply it to other facets of my life. So even as a scholar and even as an academic scholar in the research that I do, I can take my skill sets that I've developed within the party and apply them to that academic setting. And so when I was learning about ways that I could try to articulate this to you all, it occurred to me that when people are explaining the definitions of racism, for example, they might pull from Dr. Kamara Jones's A Gardener's Tale. If you're not familiar with that piece, you should definitely look it up and read it. It is an amazing piece. Now, Dr. Jones doesn't necessarily highlight capitalism, which would be my biggest contradiction and critique of the article, but she does, however, lay out three important principles to help us understand just how racism is systemically and institutionally propagandized and manifested within us. And I think she does a great job doing that. So what I did was I took those three principles and I applied it to patriarchy, because why not? Those are both systemic oppressions. They're both systems that oppress people. Why can't we borrow it from that article and put it into this one? Why not? Same thing, right? So she introduces personally mediated, internalized, and institutional. And as I said, she was speaking from the mindset of racism. I'm applying it to patriarchy because it is the same difference. So with personally mediated, this would be examples where you yourself have found a way to accept and promote patriarchy, maybe because you don't know you can push against it, or maybe because you just think there's no other way to navigate that. And so I would give the example of my grandmother. May she rest in peace. Love, love, love my grandmother, and I miss her every single day. But, you know, older people, especially older Africans, were from a very different time, and patriarchy was just very much a stigma and a very institutionalized part of their life. That was just the bottom line. So my grandmother, I love her so much. May she rest in peace. But I do remember that when my parents divorced and when they told her that they were divorcing, I don't think she held my dad to the same principles and standards that she held my mom to, which was very problematic. And to the point where she told my mom, and I quote, "You should have ironed his shirts more." That would be an example of personally mediated patriarchy, where not only are we not looking at how both parties have consented to this divorce being finalized, but second, I should have ironed his shirts more. What does that have to do with the fact that we're both deciding to get a divorce? Like, that has nothing to do with that. But from her time and her generation and the way she was raised and the way she saw patriarchy as a very valuable thing in her marriage, it was a very different time. So this is not to give disrespect. This is just stating the facts. Personally mediated is how you navigate your own personal experiences while still trying to perpetuate a system that is very harmful. And how harmful is it for someone to tell you the fact that your relationship is not successful is because you should have done more to make their shirts more clean? That's not okay. And we need to call it out. We need to name it. Even as uncomfortable as it is, we need to call it, name it, and cease the behavior. Stop perpetuating it. Stop enforcing it. Stop expecting people to iron your shirts, especially if you're not willing to do anything in the process of still contributing to the household. If this person irons your shirts and that person does the dishes, I think that's different. But when we're assigning a gender to the role, that's where the problematic pieces come from. And we need to highlight that. We need to name it and highlight it. Internalized patriarchy. This is where you yourself are battling with your internal part because you are feeling like, the system is going to continue to win. And I don't think that I'm ever going to be enough for this system, right? Internalized patriarchy. This is what I navigate every single day as a cis African woman who has a PhD and a learning disability. I don't feel like I'm enough every single day. And when I walk my campus that I work at, when I am in public spaces, when I'm trying to navigate things where I'm going to concerts or, restaurants or whatever it may be, I am constantly struggling with how much space I hold. I'm constantly struggling with how much I need to say in spaces. I don't want to say too much and have people get turned off by what I have to say. I don't want to be angry because I don't want to be an angry African woman. I'm trying to be mindful of my emotions. It's a lot of BS that I have to facilitate in my brain every single day. And then you add on the fact that I learn differently. That does not help. Trust me. That does not help. So it's very difficult when you are trying to articulate and advocate for yourself, but you also live in a society where people are propagandized to treat you with disrespect because you are insignificant and you don't matter. And that's just from a patriarchy standpoint. Don't let me speak about white supremacy. That's an extra layer. Don't let me speak about ableism. That's an extra layer. Don't let me speak about classism. That is an extra layer on top of what I just said about patriarchy. So it's very difficult to navigate that. And I would argue that, when you think about Charisse Kramer Ray's theory of muted group theory, this is what she was talking about how communication and language in society is constructed based on male identifying people. So when non-male identifying people are trying to communicate things in the world, they're having a harder time because people are less likely to understand them because they're not adopting the traditional ways that language has been socialized, that language has been accepted, that language has been practiced. And because we're introducing some new things, because I might say something differently from how Baba Ajamu says it, you are probably more likely to recognize how he is saying it, even if I just said it. And that sounds familiar to some of us because that would be the definition of mansplaining, right? But it happens all the time. It happens all the time. Also, let's think about language for a second. Think about the word human. That's very exclusive. Think about the word height man, very exclusive because everybody doesn't identify as a man. I personally don't say the word you guys. I do not say that word because everybody that I'm speaking to may not identify as a guy. And these are all colonial terms, don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying, I'm just asking us to think more critically. Because if we're trying to be inclusive, then that should include us using inclusive language. That's all I'm saying. If we're really trying to be inclusive, that's what that means. So, this internal battle that I have with myself, this internalized patriarch, feeling like I'm not enough, the imposter syndrome, feeling like I'm not communicating enough, I'm not doing enough, I'm not all of this, that's all of that, and it boils down to a really ugly feeling at the end of the day. So we have to battle that with the ideas that, pushing against the capitalism, pushing against the patriarch, pushing against the white supremacy, and understanding that all of these systems are designed to kill us, essentially, and potentially to kill us physiologically, right? If we can stress people out, people of color, then our job is done. So, what does it mean for us to take control of that? What does it mean for us to take control ideologically and physically so that we can be in a better position to push against that, right? And then last but not least, institutionally. So this would be represented by systems. I mentioned the gender wage gap, structures, building equipment. I think I mentioned this in a seminar many, many months ago, if not sooner. But I purchased a office chair many, many years ago when I was still living in Memphis, and I was assembling the office chair. And I kid you not, the instruction manual literally said, like step 6, it said, once you put the base of the chair on, you're going to need to lift the chair up. Lifting the chair may not be adequate for a petite woman, and she probably will need to find a man to lift the chair. And I'm like, this is not like 1857, you all. Like, this is 2024, okay? That this chair has been purchased, and this was printed in a booklet that was then copied, okay, and distributed into boxes where said chairs were sold and ordered online. So I'm just saying, like, these are things to think about, like really big things to think about. These are not minor things. And again, like, how is that harmful to the people who are reading that? How is that harmful to them? Like, these are the questions, right? And are we supporting that or are we pushing against it? Like, those are the questions, right? Those are the questions. We need to really think about that. All right. So when we continue to highlight, how African women are being attacked, we can also think about ways that we need to fight against this. Why this is why we always say to join an organization that's working for justice. As I said earlier, resisting it, speaking out against it, calling it, naming it, and then organizing ways to go against that and to not be with the mainstream, but to actually push against it by any means necessary. I want to call on Moya Bailey's misogynar and this concept of understanding that African women are more likely to be susceptible to effects of misogynoir because of our race, but also because of our gender, right? So it's white supremacy plus patriarchy that equals this misogynoir concept. We can also even think about Arlene Geronimus's Weathering, which is my personal favorite, because it highlights the physical degradation of your body that your body will go through because you are experiencing both patriarchy and racism and white supremacy on a day-to-day basis. This is why African women have really bad health outcomes. This is why we have poor lactation rates when we feed our children. This is why we are more likely to develop the most aggressive types of cancer. We're more likely to be considered obese and have diabetes and all these things. That's not by accident, you all. And we could argue individual behavior, yes, to some extent, yes. But I'm talking systemically. I'm talking about the fact that Africans are more likely to live in food deserts. That's systemic, you all. I'm talking about the fact that Africans are more likely to live in environmental racist experiences where they are living next to train tracks and breathing in the chemical toxins that come from that. I'm talking about the fact that Africans are more likely to live in areas where they don't have access to mass transit. So, how do they get to work every day if they're also less likely to have a car? If they're less likely to have a car, that also means not only are they challenged with getting to work every day, but they're also challenged with getting to the doctors. And that's assuming that they have good insurance or any at all. Because now you have people who are deciding, do I buy food for my family or do I pay to get this mammogram? That's the real deal, y'all. That is the real deal. And Africans are suffering greatly. Indigenous people suffering greatly. Queer identifying people suffering greatly. And my Asian comrades, they're not doing great either when it comes to health. Sometimes their rates are a little bit higher, but it really just depends. For example, cervical cancer hits my Asian descent folks very, very hard. So we have to ask these questions, you all. We have to legit ask these questions and break down what all of this means. And so Arlene Geronimus's Weathering is very powerful because the physical toll that this takes on your body is beyond measure. And it's really something to think about. We can also introduce cultural taxation. And this is really big within the party right now, where we're trying to acknowledge how does positions get assigned based on gender roles. So for example, within the party, we have work study meetings. And within these work study meetings, obviously, we need people to take minutes. And we try our best, if we are conscious of the cultural taxation, we try our best to alternate the roles of taking minutes because traditionally, minute taking has been assigned as a specific gender. And I think even if people don't intend to, they still have an impact where they might say, oh, Shukura, can you take minutes? And I think it has a lot to do with the subconscious and the sublime of me being a woman identifying person. We're less likely to ask a male identifying person to take minutes than we are a woman identifying person, especially because traditionally secretarial administration roles were carried by who? Non-male people. And again, like we just have to push against that, you all. I'm not saying that we all should be embarrassed or we should all like, jump off a bridge because we think that way. This is the propaganda of the system. This is why this is a system of oppression. This is what I said earlier. You might have one person who is perpetuating this, but ultimately we have all been taught this. All of us have been taught this. And male identifying people, you all benefit from patriarchy, yes. But patriarchy also is a great attribute, a great contribution and attributes greatly to your poor mental health outcomes. If you want to really talk some knowledge right now, it attributes greatly to your mental health poor outcomes because the bottom line is patriarchy also designates that because you're a male identifying person, you should, bring home money for your family. You should bring home the bacon, right? So what happens when you lose your job? Do you tell your partner right away? Of course not, because you probably feel like a failure. You feel like you let your family down. You feel like you're not enough. You feel like you need to hustle. You don't want to tell your partner until you find another job, right? Because then you don't want to just be like out there with no plan. How harmful is that to your mental health? How harmful is that to your stress? How harmful is that to your blood pressure? Also, let's look at the system that has set it up for it to be like that because you didn't ask to lose your job that day. It just happened, right? Because you're no more important than all the other pawns that you're working with. Now, unless you own the company, but if you own the company, I strongly doubt you'd be listening to the seminar right now. Okay. So these are the things, you all. We got to dig deeper and we got to think. We have got to think. It is not illegal yet. We have got to think. We have got to use our brains. That's what they're there for. And they are muscles. We need to develop them and grow them and build them. That is what we need to do. This is why we need to increase our political education. That's on us, y'all. We need to do better with that. So that's how that comes down. And the cultural taxation is more powerful than you know. Being mindful of that. And you can even apply that to your personal life. You can apply that to your profession. How much cultural taxation is assumed? In my profession, working on a college campus, when I am asked to take on tasks, services, different things for students, I notice that there are more non-male people present than there are male identified. Excuse me. Yeah, I said that right. There are more non-male people present than male identifying people. I just signed up for a professional development training that focuses on post-traumatic stress with online students. And it was a very small training, and it probably had about 15 people. There was one male identifying person who literally had he, him pronouns in the Zoom. That was the only reason I knew that. So as we were coming to these trainings, I'm just thinking to myself, everybody on campus got this email. So what is it that non-male people are signing up? Because we're more, crafted to be nurturers, and we're more crafted to be empathetic and take care. Yeah, but also that's BS if other people are not expected to do the same thing. And it's BS if other people are not expected to give us the same thing that we're giving back. This is exactly what Arlene Geronimus was talking about. The literal fatigue that we feel when we are giving, 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 and it's not being reciprocated. That's messed up, yo. And Stephanie Erdang fighting two colonialisms, that's what she was talking about. That's messed up, and it's not okay. We can't expect non-male people to show up for us and to fight on the battles with us, as Thomas Sankara said, if they're going to have to battle when they get to their house, because domestic violence is another issue. I really need us to wake up, y'all. We need to wake up. Like, we need to wake up. Okay, this is what it comes down to, and it's really important that we understand that, especially when we dig a little bit deeper into how these attacks are harming African folks, African communities, and more importantly, this is stopping us from achieving our ultimate goal of getting one unified socialist Africa and getting control of our resources back. We can also start to think about how, Kwame Nkrumah, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, one of our founders of this organization, said that the degree of a country's political education can best be measured by the education of its women. He didn't say that by accident, you all. Women identifying people and non-male people have access points, and we have privileges, and we have avenues, and we have ways to navigate things. We have ways to change communities. We have ways of enhancing people. We have ways of building families. We have ways of literally changing revolutions. Literally changing revolutions. I'll say it again. Literally changing revolutions. If you don't believe me, then look at what happened with Cuba with their socialist revolution. They acknowledged that the first thing they needed to do was educate everyone on the island. So they made sure to start teaching people how to read and write. They asked the children, because the children were already receiving that education. So they asked the children to travel the island and to teach every single person how to read and write. They organized which person was going east, which person was going west, which person was going with the group to the north, which person was going to the south. And by the time those children were done, by the time the teachers that they had also educated were done teaching everybody how to read, guess what that did for their economy? Now everyone knows how to read and write. So that means more people can apply for jobs. So their economy boosted, because now they didn't have to worry about not as many people working. If the economy boosted and more people were working, what does that do for their infrastructure? What does that do for their social norms? Now they have a social life. They can build a ballet so people can, they can build a theater so people can go to the ballet. They can build parks where people can walk their dogs and meet their partners and their lovers and just sit in the park and enjoy the day. They have people playing games on the beach. They have people exercising and running with running groups and stuff. All of this is because people have the money to invest it in the community. You have restaurants that are open until 11 p.m. at night because they know people are going to come and order, and they can count on that revenue coming in to build their business. That's not by accident, you all. That's by design, because according to Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, the degree of a country's political education can best be measured by the education of its women. And that is exactly what they did. They also didn't want women to stop working because of their personal responsibilities, not personal, because of their familial responsibilities. So, for example, another policy that they put in place that is written under the family code was that for women that live on the island, if they are working and let's say their work hours are 8 to 5 p.m. and they need to get groceries so that they can have dinner ready by 6 or whatever, they're in a bad position because they couldn't get to the grocery store in time and now the family is eating late. And so you had some people that were quitting their jobs. The government stepped in and said, no, we don't want people quitting their jobs. Let's organize a Cuban new and improved Instacart service. So now what they have is that working class women can leave their list at the grocery stores in the morning. And then when they get off work and they come back that afternoon, the food has already been pulled off the shelves. It's been packaged. It's been prepared in the bags. They can just pay really quickly and then take their groceries and go cook for their family. Way before Instacart even came up with this concept, Cuban people were already exercising this. And that's just one example that I could name. There's many, many more. That is just one example that I could name, even with communities that didn't have access to washing machines or dryers. So the community spoke to their representative, they spoke to their municipal representative. The representative then spoke to the other representatives of the other municipals, and they communicated to the government. The government gave them some money. They built a laundromat. I mean, this is what that looks like, you all. Because we understand, I'm saying we, like I'm a part of the Cuban Revolution, but I am. We understand that we can't afford for you not being able to do your laundry or you not being able to get your groceries. Again, patriarchal concepts. We can't afford for those things to interrupt the larger objection at hand, which is building a socialist system that works for people so that we can start to eradicate patriarchy behavior. We can start to eradicate racist behavior. We can start to eradicate homophobic behavior. Capitalist behavior has already been eradicated. And really, we can start to move towards a communist state. That is ultimately the goal. So we don't want people to still experience oppression in a socialist state because socialism is the bridge that's going to get us to communism. And we certainly don't want people to be oppressed under a communist state. That means that we haven't done anything and we haven't progressed forward. So if Cuban people understand this, why can't the rest of us get on board with understanding that Cuba was right and we need to learn from them and move forward? It is not that difficult. It is really not that difficult. The bottom line becomes this is where I have a serious problem with like the gender roles in particular, because if we're talking about laundry, if we're talking about cooking for the family, everybody's eating. Is everybody not eating, or is just the woman identifying person eating because she's the one that cooked? No, everybody's eating, right? We need laundry, we need towels, we need clothes. If everybody is wearing these clothes, shouldn't everybody chip in to help wash the clothes? I mean, is it just me? That just makes sense to me. That just makes sense to me because we're also talking about an equitable distribution of labor. And if we're trying to prevent Arlene Geronimus's weathering, then that means we all need to step in to help and not just assume that it is on the woman identifying person, because that is how she will build a faster progression of aging and potentially a fatal outcome if we don't step in to do our part. That's really what it boils down to, y'all. That's really what it boils down to. So this is really, really important. And again, shout out to Cuba for understanding that eradicating illiteracy rates was the way to go for the whole country. That's really been a big piece right there. And it's really humbling to be able to say that I witnessed that even today with how people are flourishing in the economic space because of the fact that no one is not educated on that island. It was really something to think about, especially when you think about how they also organized to have the Women's Federation of Cuba, which is a national organization that all non-male people, women identifying people on Cuban soil also belong to. So again, patriarchy, homophobia, racism, those were all put in the family code as practices that could not be distributed or I'll say illustrated any further. And if the behaviors were detected, then there would be ways and motions in place to prevent that from happening again. And part of that has been, has been demonstrated already. Excuse me, from the different ways that you have the island organizing women identifying people. You have people who are teaching children what it means to have queerness and what it means to have a queer identity. They're getting queer LGBTQIA curriculum embedded in their lessons every single day, and they're also learning about white supremacy and racism. So I think that like all of this is by design, but it doesn't mean that it cannot be done elsewhere. And if you're not careful, you have people that will teach you that this is just the way, like this Kevin Samuels character, but that's not the way. And you don't have to accept that. Cuba didn't, so why should you? Cuba didn't, so why should you? And Cuba is not this, anomaly that we can do what they have done. Are we willing to organize to do it? That's the question. It's not a question of is it possible? It's a question of what are we willing to sacrifice to make it happen? That is the question. So as I review this last side to prepare to hand it back to Baba Ajamu, I just want to say that, as we continue to think about International Women's Day and as we continue to think about ways to perpetuate and to promote and to organize against these systems, patriarchy, sexism, toxic masculinity, take your pick, even machismo. I meant to mention that one earlier. Machismo is a huge one. It's so toxic, so bad, so bad, so bad. Even if we think more about this, African women and African marginalized groups are constantly being held accountable for things that they literally have no control for, constantly being held accountable. Everyone has privilege. Every single one of us have privilege, especially on this call today. But the question is not, do you have privilege? Because we all have it. Every single one of us has it. You have some type of device that has coltan or cobalt in it, which receives a signal, which allows you to tune in to this internet network based broadcast seminar for you to join us right now. There are people on this planet that do not have any type of device to even begin to log into a seminar like this. That is a great example of our privilege right now. Some people don't even have a roof over their head and they barely have a phone that picks up a signal. Some people have the lowest computational literacy where they can't even navigate a device to be able to type in how to get to the Zoom link to log in, or how to get to Facebook, or how to get to Instagram. However, you are tuning in today, some people don't even know how to spell because this country doesn't value education like Cuba does. So people don't even know how to spell. And if you don't know how to spell, you can't type on the keyboard. If you can't type on the keyboard, how are you going to log into the seminar? Okay. So again, we all have privilege. So we're not going to question that. Okay. But beyond that, how are you using your privilege? How are you using it? And more importantly, what are you willing to risk so that people who have less privilege than you can still benefit from some of the beautiful assets that you have access to? That's the question. That's always been the question. And if you're not really clear on what I'm talking about, you can think about last week's seminar. Auntie Marilyn Buck, she risked all of her privilege because she understood that the Black Liberation Army had a greater path for what was happening and they were wrongly accused for crimes they did not commit. And she very much used her European descent, white privilege, to make a huge difference that allowed my Auntie Asada to be freed from prison. Right. The week before that, you can think about our comrade and ancestor, Carlotta Lusumi. She risked her privilege and freed a great number of enslaved Africans in Cuba, which very much stirred the conversation towards why a socialist Cuba even needed to be considered in the first place. Because if you remember me saying when I gave one of my first report backs, I talked about our comrade Victor Drakey and how he was one of the first commanding officers for Ernesto Che Guevara, but he also fought in Algeria, he fought in the Congo. I mean, Victor Drakey fought in several different wars on African soil as a Cuban soldier because he understood the connection between Africa and Cuba. And Victor Drakey fought again with the socialist Cuban revolution because he also understood that being an African on Cuban soil was very harmful because he experienced white supremacy before the socialist revolution. He experienced segregation. He couldn't go to certain hotels on the island. He talked about how he couldn't do certain things that more of the European Spaniard people could do. And he knew that something had to be changed. And this is why he fought with Fidel and why he fought with Ernesto. So my point is Carlotta Lusumi's, slave revolt that kind of made the trajectory towards the socialist revolution. And then you have Victor Drakey, who fought timeless and time and time and time and time again. You have people who are fighting, whether it was the Congo, whether it was Algeria. You have all these different people who are fighting, who are on Cuban soil, but fighting for the rights of African people. And then that brings us to Auntie Marilyn and so on and so forth. So the question becomes, all of these people had privilege. They all had privilege. You know what else they all had in common? They were all in organizations that were fighting for justice. And a lot of times when you're in an organization that is fighting for justice, that's also a level of privilege because you're going to get access to information that the United States capitalist government is not going to provide for you. They're going to make it very difficult, actually, for you to access said information. So, this is why you have to have political education, because you have to understand that you cannot trust what the US government is telling you. You should almost always assume that it is a lie. And you should also cross fact it and cross check it. And the best way to do that is to research from credible sources, from people who lived through these things and were able to write a book in the process. Whether you're reading Asada's autobiography, whether you're reading Kwame Ture's autobiography, you should definitely read Kwame Nkrumah's autobiography. Those are just some names that I would very much think would greatly benefit you to start you off. But there's countless resources out there. So the question is not, do you have privilege? It's, what are you willing to risk? And every single one of these Africans was willing to risk it all because they wanted a better world for the rest of us. How humbling is that, to just sit here and think about that? The fact that they didn't want you to struggle the way they did. The fact that they were willing to put everything on the line. Some of these folks never saw their families again, you all. Some of these folks left that day and they knew it would be the last time that they saw their families. We have to really honor that, you all. We have to hold space for that. They literally died so that we could live better. So we can't just come from that and then not continue that. It doesn't work like that, because the future generation deserves even a better world than what we had. And we owe it to them, you all, because it's bigger than us. We owe it to them. Yes, we owe it to them. That's not up for discussion. Again, you stand on the shoulders of greatness and you don't think that's by accident. People sacrifice for you to be where you are today. They sacrifice for you to have the AC or the heat or whatever element you're in right now. They sacrifice so that you could have internet and be able to Zoom and join us on this seminar. Those are sacrifices, you all. That's not without question. So we have to ask ourselves, what does that boil down to and what does that look like? I'm speaking to male identifying people right now. You all need to understand what your role is in fighting. And if you're going to ask non male people to show up and to fight with you, you better be willing to fight for us too. I'm sick of this lopsided situation here. And again, to quote Thomas Sankara, it's not fair for you to expect me to show up on the battlefields with my AR-15 and I'm ready to go to battle with you to fight the European oppressor. But then when I get back to my house, you're still expecting me to cook and clean and raise the children and teach them and help them to grow. And you're doing nothing. That is unacceptable and it will not be tolerated anymore. Point blank. Unacceptable. Do better. Your African people deserve better. You deserve better. Your partner deserves better. Do better. That's unacceptable. If we want to prevent weathering, that's the first way that we can do that. Acknowledge your privilege and figure out how you can contribute so that you're not just perpetuating the cultural taxation once again. Join an organization that is working for justice and continue to increase your political education because we need you. And with that, I will pass it back to Baba Jam.
Obrigada. That was an outstanding analysis. Shakur, thank you very much for that. I just hope people can sit with it and can act upon your, it's really like a call to action to me. So we can act upon it. The only bit of feedback I have is I think we should have AK-47s, not AR-15s. AR-15s are the guns produced from the imperialist countries like this one. That's where those are produced. AK-47s are considered the communist gun, and there are 4 times as many AK-47s in the world as there are AR-15s. They're more powerful. They operate under more restrictive conditions. You can go months without cleaning them, using them, and they still operate. So I would take an AK over an AR-15, but I think your presentation was absolutely fantastic. Thank you for that. And if you could go to the next slide, I'll close this out, please. And just while Shakur is hopefully moving us to that next slide, I'll just start. So next week, we definitely first want to encourage you to think about what you just heard over this last hour, especially if you're man identifying. We have so much work to do, and we have to do it, you all, and we can't do it through identity politics. We have to do it through political identity. Those are not the same thing. And we have to do it consistently, and we have to be willing to go up against conditions that would make things very uncomfortable for us, and that's how we make progress. So I hope that all of us consider that. And we want to ask you to join us next Sunday, April 5th. April 4th is the 58th commemoration of the assassination of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So we thought it was appropriate to talk about efforts to discredit Dr. King's legacy. These efforts have actually been going back since the 1960s, the mid 1960s, early 1960s, even. But they really have, with the access to social media today, they've really proliferated. And if you recall, you saw a lot of that when that fascist was shot in the neck and killed a few months ago, however long it was. I don't know. I don't pay attention to timelines with racist fascists. But whenever that happened, there were all these comments about he was this generation's Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. I'm sure you heard some of that. And the reason why that was happening is because of these efforts to discredit King's legacy. So we're going to talk about these efforts going on today to discredit King's legacy. And the reason why we think it's appropriate for us to talk about that is because we're not adherents to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We don't, I say all the time, I don't agree with 5% of what he was talking about, but I respect the fact that he was a principled person in our struggle for liberation. He wasn't co-opted like these people are trying to claim. He wasn't selling us out like these people are trying to claim today. And a lot of and these people criticizing him, they're doing nothing to advance our struggles. So we're going to talk about that next week. We invite you to join us. And then the QR code in the upper left, the red and white one, there's a number of important information bits in there. So we ask you to go in there. Hood Communist blog is in there. A lot of us write regularly for them, as well as a plethora of other outstanding African authors. So check that out. We have other AAPRP programs in there that you can become aware of if you're not and have access to listen to. So we encourage you to do that. And of course, the Forward Ever Shop, which is our store, if you will, that sells revolutionary literature clothing. So we ask you to support that. That's how we finance our work, particularly at home on the African continent. The core of our work happens there. So when you buy something from the Forward Ever shop, you're contributing to that work. So we ask you to do that. And that's a beautiful thing when you do buy these clothes. If you've already bought something, that's great. We appreciate it. Buy some more. If you've bought a couple of things, tell other people about it. When you have a birthday that you're buying gifts for, buy something with revolutionary literature on it and use that as a present. Continue to sustain. You don't just go to the supermarket once and never go again. You don't just go to the bar once. You don't go to the dispensary once and never go again. You continue to patronize those types of entities that are doing nothing to liberate our people. So have that same energy with organizations that are providing resources to help us get free. That's all. Don't sit back and say, well, I already did that. I ordered a hoodie, so I'm done with that. I mean, that's insane thinking. All right. And so we want to ask you to please do that. There's the All African Women's Revolutionary Union logo on the screen, and we want to acknowledge that. We didn't get a couple of them on here that we wanted. The report back on my trip to Azania, South Africa, Monday, April 6th. For those of you that are here in Sacramento area, we invite you to come out. It's at 2775 Cottage Way, like cottage cheese, 2775 Cottage Way, Unit 15. We're going to focus on three questions at that report back on our organizing trip. Number one, this discussion, another major social media discussion is yeah, I don't know nobody in Africa. They don't even like us in Africa. Blah blah blah. I'm ignorant as hell. Blah blah blah. So we're gonna have a discussion about that. I'm someone who has spent an awful lot of time in Africa, so I'm qualified to speak on this question from not just from an emotional standpoint, although that's certainly a major aspect of it, but also from a scientific and historical standpoint. So we're gonna talk about that. at the report back. We're also going to talk about the apartheid system. What does it look like in 2026 and beyond? Did it end in 1994? We say no. And we're going to explain to you why we say that in clear terms. And then finally, we always talk about Pan Africanism. What does it look like on the ground in Africa? That's the reason why I go to Africa. I don't go to be a tourist, I go to participate in work that our organization is doing there. So I want to show you that so you can see it, so you can understand that this is when we say Pan Africanism, it's not just an idea in our head, it's not just a hope. It's not just a dream, it's actual on the ground work that is happening that you will never see on CNN and CIA networks. You will never see that. So we're going to talk about those three things. So if you're in Sacramento, you should come. And if you're not, and you know people in this area, you should tell them about it. Again, Monday, April 6th, a week from tomorrow, 6 to 8 p.m., 2775 Cottage Way, Unit 15. 2775 Cottage Way, Unit 15. Most where you live, wherever you are, you don't have events like this. This is a very good event for people to participate in. So please, please, please help us spread the word. Also, the self defense class that happens every Thursday night here happens every Thursday. We have political education. We exercise your mind and your body. So we don't have the flyer up, but I'm going to tell you about it. It's at the same location, Thursdays from 6 to 8 p.m. Pacific time. It's at the same location, 2775 Cottage Way, Unit 15, 2775 Cottage Way, like cottage cheese, Unit 15. So come on out. And again, if you're not in Sacramento, tell people that are here. And if you are, you should come. It's a great way to exercise your mind and body, learn techniques that can save your life. I don't want to see these, oh, they attacked me. I didn't know. I was shocked. No, you shouldn't be shocked. It happens every damn day. You don't be shocked. Get prepared. Get organized so that when it happens to you, you can put them down. You can put them in their grave if that's where they need to be. We have every right to defend ourselves and stop all this nonsense. So you won't do that if you don't know how. So get involved with these free efforts to help you get prepared. That's what that's for. Take it seriously. Don't come late. Come on time. Be ready. Be prepared to move forward. That's what we need. Join the AAPRP, AAPRP-intl.org. Very important to do that. And then the QR code on the bottom right, the black and white one, our work in the Sahel. Scan that code and become a monthly sponsor to the work that's happening in the Sahel to bring our revolutionary work study literature books there so that we can build the African revolution in that region, all that's happening there. We want you to do that. And then I have a book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. We didn't get the QR code, but if you can just type in that book, you can get it. It's only $8 US. We ask you to do that. It's a good organizing book. I don't take my word for it. I mean, there's dozens of reviews of it, so check it out. And 100% of the proceeds go towards the anti-fascist work that we do. We risk our lives working to keep people safe, and we need training. We have to do training. Last week I went out of town. Tomorrow I got to go do one. Trying to get people prepared to defend themselves. And so, whatever support you can provide to do that is very helpful to us. Even if you have the book, same with the Forward Ever Shop, you don't just stop because you bought one. You didn't stop going to the dispensary because you bought weed last week. You going again next week and the week after that and the week after that and the week after that. Well, this is requires even more of a commitment, right? So thank you if you bought the book, but get your local bookstore. It takes 5 minutes. Call them. Say, hey, you should have that book. Call them. Call your local library. Call two libraries. Damn it, get it in there. Help us do this so that we can buy the supplies. I'm not asking you to get out there and risk your physical life. So help us provide the resources so that we can do it and train people. Because if we have better capacity to do that, then you don't have to get out there. And you can continue just flapping your gums about what you're going to do while we're doing it because you're helping us do it. And I'll accept that if that's what it has to be. Thank you. So, forward ever, we hope to see you next week. We ask you to do something nice for yourself, take care of yourself, but be strong, be committed. I don't know if anybody